Good morning. I'm very happy to be chairing the first Superfund Waste Management and Regulatory Oversight Subcommittee hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning this on time, and we're going to try to be done at about 20 minutes after the hour in deference to Secretary Kerry. And so we'll try to get through as much of today's testimony as possible, and then we'll ask the members to submit any additional questions for the record and ask you to respond to those appropriately. But we appreciate your being here. The Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Superfund Waste Management and Regulatory Oversight is meeting for the first time today to conduct a hearing on oversight of the management of the Federal Environmental Protection, Chemical Safety, and Fish and Wildlife agencies. I'd like to thank our witnesses, Inspector General Arthur Elkins of the Environmental Protection Agency and Deputy Inspector General Mary Kendall of the Department of the Interior, for taking time out of their schedules to be with us today. I'm honored to be chairing this subcommittee in the 114th Congress with my friend from Massachusetts, Senator Ed Markey, as ranking member. As subcommittee chairman, I plan to conduct thorough oversight of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of the Interior. The inspectors general from these agencies can and should serve as a resource for these reviews, and today's hearing serves as a starting point for this oversight plan. Inspectors general are tasked with independently conducting audits and investigations relating to agency actions and programmatic mismanagement. Not only are they an asset to congressional oversight, but their recommendations are effective at correcting mismanagement, waste, fraud, and abuse at the EPA and the Department of the Interior. It is essential the inspectors general view Congress as a partner in this oversight process. Throughout this Congress, we will be focusing chiefly on good governance and making certain the agencies are operating transparently, responsibly managing taxpayer dollars, and working to achieve their core missions without regulatory overreach so prevalent in agency actions today. More than ever, we're seeing agency regulatory regimes expanding federal jurisdiction beyond their statutory limits, encroaching into private businesses, landowners' rights, and states' abilities to manage and regulate the environment and land within their own borders. Additionally, the EPA and the Department of the Interior are moving forward with implementing major environmental regulations impacting every sector of the United States economy and affecting hundreds of thousands of American jobs. We must make certain that the regulations these agencies implement and are being written in an open, transparent process that allows for full public participation, taking into account all views regardless of the agency's notions of their goals. The EPA and Fish and Wildlife Service owe it to the American people to not only provide a thorough, transparent, and honest analysis of how regulations will affect them, but also to base these regulations on the most current and reliable economic data and sound science. Notably, these IGs have conducted recent investigations on mismanagement at the Chemical Safety Board, grant management, and administrative management issues. I look forward to hearing a review of the work of the IGs, which they have done regarding management of the EPA, CSB, and Fish and Wildlife Service, along with an update of the review of the IGs which they are currently undertaking. Again, I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us today and for presenting their testimony. Now I'd like to recognize my friend Senator Markey for his opening statement as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And I want to thank you, Chairman Rounds, for holding this first hearing of the subcommittee. I'm looking forward very much to working with you in this Congress on these very important issues. The offices of Inspector General are tremendously important to governmental integrity. These watchdogs must be independent, nonpartisan, and maintain the highest ethical standards to ensure the public's trust. In addition to fighting fraud, waste, and abuse of power, they ensure the government works the way Congress intended and the public deserves. For example, the Securities and Exchange Commission Inspector General uncovered the mishandling of whistleblowers' tips in the Madoff Ponzi scheme and failure to take basic steps to stop it. In response, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act to protect whistleblowers and provide incentives and mechanisms to report and promptly remedy misconduct. Inspector Generals also save billions of taxpayer dollars each year. For example, the Special Inspectors General for Afghanistan and Iraq reconstruction together recovered almost $3 billion related to waste and fraud associated with the government's reconstruction work. Your offices have also made notable contributions. For example, the former Department of Interior Inspector General identified a culture of ethical failure that occurred when the same office was responsible for oil and gas leases, revenue collection, and enforcement of drilling safety and environmental regulations. Following this report, the Department implemented a more robust ethics program and announced a major departmental reorganization to eliminate those conflicts of interest. The Environmental Protection Agency Inspector General has also done significant work in overseeing management and personnel challenges at both the Environmental Protection Agency and the Chemical Safety Board. The Inspector General has also found that the Environmental Protection Agency needs to improve oversight of the State's implementation and enforcement. In a 2014 memo, the Inspector General raised concerns about States' implementation and enforcement of vital environmental programs designed to protect the public from beaches contaminated by dangerous levels of bacteria and to ensure proper long-term monitoring of Superfund sites so that they are safe for reuse. But in order to for oversight by Inspectors General to garner public trust, transparency is key. Inspectors General have a responsibility to report their activities, findings, and recommendations to Congress and the public promptly. Yet in 2014, the Department of Interior Office of Inspector General closed 533 investigations and released just 55 public reports. Inspectors General also rely on the cooperation of the agencies they oversee. As Mr. Elkins' 2014 testimony indicated, when an Inspector General is faced with obstruction and obfuscation by an agency, inefficiency thrives unchecked and potential wrongdoing evades both notice and consequences. And I agree with that. Agencies must cooperate to guarantee access to the information you need and to take corrective actions in response to your findings. I look forward to your testimony today about the important work which you do and how Congress can help you to do your job better. And I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator, for sharing your thoughts. Now we'll turn to our first witness from the EPA, Mr. Elkins, for 5 minutes. Mr. Elkins, you may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Rounds, Ranking Member Markey, and members of the subcommittee. I am Arthur Elkins, Inspector General for EPA and CSB. Thank you for inviting me to appear before you today. This morning, I will touch on a few matters that I believe will be of special interest. However, my written statement provides much greater detail on these and additional topics. I'll begin with audit highlights. Following OIG's criminal investigation of John Bill, an EPA senior policy advisor who defrauded the government out of nearly $900,000 while pretending to be an undercover agent for the CIA, OIG commenced a series of audits examining certain EPA processes. 2 of those audits on timekeeping and use of administrative leave are ongoing. We expect to issue our reports in mid-June and late summer, respectively. Simultaneously, OIG is conducting a program evaluation of how EPA and states are using their authorities to manage the potential impacts of hydraulic fracturing on water resources. This report, too, is on track for issuance in late summer. On the investigative front, last month, a Florida jury convicted 2 scientists, a married couple, of wire fraud, identity theft, and obstruction. They had fraudulently obtained about $10.5 million in small research awards, including several contracts with EPA, by using stolen identities of real people to create false endorsements. The investigative team included EPA OIG. Sentencing in that case has been set for May 28th of this year. As an independent and objective office charged under the IG Act with oversight of management and program performance, it is critical that an OIG be able to carry out its work without obstruction. 2 impediment issues, one at EPA and one at CSB, have forced Congress to become actively involved during this past year. At EPA, a unit called the Office of Homeland Security has impeded OIG's ability to investigate threats against employees and facilities, certain misconduct allegations, and computer intrusions. After saying otherwise for months, OHS now agrees that there is no category of activity at EPA to which OIG does not have unfettered access. And FBI senior management confirms that FBI does not require EPA to withhold information from the OIG. Still, EPA has not rescinded a memorandum of understanding with FBI that has precluded such information sharing. Also important is the fact that OIG has been unable to resolve the issue of OHS having an assigned criminal investigator while lacking any investigative authority. The second impediment to OIG relates to CSB. We requested documents following complaints alleging use of non-governmental email accounts to conduct official business, which CSB officials refused to provide for more than a year. Not until I sent a 7-day letter and the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform's chairman and ranking member instructed Chairman Rafael Mario Arasso to provide the documents did CSB substantially comply with the OIG's request. OIG's investigation found evidence sufficient to support a conclusion that the CSB chair and 2 of his senior officials had violated the Federal Records Act and implementing regulations by using non-governmental email systems to conduct official government business and not capturing emails in the agency's record system. Ultimately, President Obama requested that the chair resign. Mr. Mario Arasso stepped down from that role last month and ended his membership on the board this past Friday. Meanwhile, a former CSB Chief Information Officer has provided to the OIG a sworn statement alleging inconsistencies in the chair's communication to me, as well as during another Hogarth hearing last month. My Office of Investigation has notified the U.S. Attorney's Office that the chair may have committed perjury and certain other crimes. These items represent a sampling of OIG's work and challenges. We will continue to work with management at both EPA and CSB to help ensure that appropriated funds are properly managed and executed and accurate information is reported. I would like to leave the subcommittee with a thought. An OIG's recommendations are only as good as an agency's implementations of them. At this time, many of this OIG's recommendations to the agencies for which I have oversight are unimplemented and way past due. Money left on the table, so to speak, does a tremendous disservice to the taxpayers. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I will be pleased to answer any questions that you or subcommittee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Elkins. We will now hear from Ms. Kendall from the Department of the Interior. Ms. Kendall, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. Good morning. I'm pleased to be here to testify about our oversight of the Fish and Wildlife Service. As you know, my office conducts a wide range of oversight of Fish and Wildlife programs and operations. 2 of Fish and Wildlife's grant programs, the Wildlife Restoration Program and the Sport Fish Restoration Program, were among DOI's 4 largest grant programs in fiscal year 2014, dispersing about $1 billion. For years, my office has provided consistent audit oversight to Fish and Wildlife for grants funded under these programs. When we took over this audit work, we created a small, dedicated unit to perform these audits, launched a systematic coverage cycle, and established a uniform approach to all state audits. Our audit findings range from internal control issues to Fish's monitoring of the state's expenditures. We have found that uniformity of our audits provide both Fish and the states with consistency of oversight that ensures that internal controls are in place to minimize financial risk in this popular grant program. Like other DOI bureaus that have underground injection control wells, Fish and Wildlife could not fully identify and does not effectively manage the UIC wells on its lands. We found several issues with Fish and Wildlife's shallow gravity drained wells, one of 6 categories defined in EPA's regulations that could potentially threaten underground drinking water. We found that the department has no overarching guidance or policy to assist bureaus in complying with EPA's regulations concerning Class 5 injection wells. This has led to inconsistent management at the bureau level. We also found that Fish does not maintain a national database on sanitary leach fields or on fish hatcheries that could have aquaculture wells, another type of Class 5 well. Finally, Fish listed 54 banned types of floor drains in 29 different states, but did not know if these were Class 5 wells. It has reportedly plugged them since we conducted our evaluation. The Coastal Impact Assistance Program provides grant funds derived from federal onshore lease revenues to oil-producing states for conservation, protection, or restoration of coastal areas, wildlife, and natural resources. The Secretary of the Interior was directed to disperse $250 million in each of fiscal years 2007 through 2010 to eligible CAP grant recipients. Responsibility for CAP was transferred to Fish and Wildlife as of October 2011. At the request of Fish, we initiated an audit in 2011 focusing on grant funds awarded to Mississippi, followed by an audit of funds awarded to Louisiana in 2013. Our audits revealed deficiencies in both states' management of grant funds, as well as poor federal oversight of grant recipients and weak risk management. In total, we questioned more than $44.1 million in CAP costs awarded only to Mississippi and Louisiana, representing ineligible grant charges, unreasonable costs, and expenses not supported by documentation. Our investigative oversight of Fish and Wildlife has focused primarily on administrative management issues in the recent past. In 2013, we issued the Secretary a management advisory urging Fish and Wildlife leadership to act on long outstanding complaints of retaliation made by employees who raise scientific integrity concerns to us and to Fish and Wildlife management. As of yesterday, 2 of the 3 cases were settled. The other case is still pending Fish and Wildlife action on the settlement. We also have ongoing administrative investigations into allegations of mismanagement and other wrongdoing on the part of Fish and Wildlife officials, including unfair and potentially illegal hiring practices, conflicts of interest, preferential treatment, and wasteful spending. Additionally, we have referred similar allegations from the same region to Fish and Wildlife Management for review. Finally, we are currently investigating allegations of Fish and Wildlife Service employee misconduct related to conservation efforts and wildlife management. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared testimony today. I would ask that my full testimony be entered into the record, and I would be happy to answer any questions you or members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Kendall, and your full remarks will be entered into the record without objection.
Thank you.
Senators will now have 6 minutes each for questions, and I will allow members to stay for a second round of questions, but with a notice that we will do our best to have a hard stop of 20 minutes past the hour. So with that, I will begin, and we will do these in 6-minute increments. I'd like to begin by just following up a little bit with Mr. Elkins in terms of the comments that you have made. I wanted to ask you about the transparency of the agencies based on your experiences. In recent reports, there have been concerns that your respective agencies do not give you full and open access to information that you need to conduct a thorough investigation of certain programmatic issues or agency actions. Inspector General Elkins, I believe that this is an issue that your office faced when conducting your investigation of the Chemical Safety Board, as you've mentioned, and when looking into how the EPA's Office of Homeland Security impedes your own investigations. Can you explain in a little bit more detail some of the issues that you faced in gaining full access to the information that your office needs, or having information withheld from you when you're conducting investigations of your respective agencies, and not only what it does to impede your ability to actually investigate, but if you could, I'd like your thoughts about what we could do to assist you in getting that information that you need.
Okay, thank you. I'd be very happy to respond to your question. Generally speaking, on the transparent access issues, my sense is that both the EPA and the CSB fail to truly embrace the underlying authorities and the concepts in the IG Act and understand exactly what it means. We spend a lot of time trying to do outreach and educate the agencies on the IG Act, the fact of what independence stands for, and the fact that we are there to help, but we are also independent. The challenge that I've run into is that in certain areas, the agencies tend to embrace that concept, but when it works in a way that it may embarrass them, they tend not to embrace that concept, and that's where we start to get some pushback. Having these sorts of hearings are very important. Having statements come from this panel as well as members on the House side in support of the work that we do is extremely important. Under the IG Act, we basically have a dual reporting responsibility. One is to the agency head, and the other is to this body. To the extent that we don't get cooperation on the agency side, the only avenue that we have available to us is you. And the fact that you're doing what you're doing is very helpful, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Kendall, last summer, 47 of your colleagues from the IG community sent a letter to Congress raising serious concerns about how agencies had either not cooperated with investigations or how the IGs had limited access to records or witnesses. Mr. Elkins had signed this letter and cited problems in working with the EPA as an example. You had chosen not to sign the letter. Can you tell us why you chose not to sign this letter, and does your unwillingness to sign the letter indicate that you did not agree with the concerns that were raised? Can you share with us a little bit about your thought process in terms of why you didn't decide
Certainly.
to sign that?
I'd be happy
Thank
to,
you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I chose not to sign that letter for several reasons. One, I am a part of the Executive Council for the SIGI, the Council of Inspectors General for Integrity and Efficiency. That body sent a formal letter to the Department of Justice with its formal position on the access issue, and I felt that as a signator, by virtue of being on the Executive Council, that was my position by virtue of SIGI. It did not in any way mean that I disagreed with the letter that was signed by the 47. The other reason I chose not to sign that separate letter was I did not want to give an indication to my agency, where I have had absolutely no problem whatsoever with access to information, to suggest that I felt there was a problem. We have not had the access problems that Mr. Elkins and some of the other IGs have had, and I did not want to indicate to my agency that I had that feeling.
So if I could, and I just want to follow up and be clear on this then. So as I understand it, you have not had a problem gaining access to records. You have not had any grant interviews refused with staff, and there has been no sense of impediment to your investigations within your agency.
None that I am aware of, sir.
Thank you very much. With that, Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Mr. Elkins, across the country, thousands of miles of old leaking natural gas distribution pipelines that run under our streets are costing consumers money, threatening public health and safety with potentially dangerous explosions, and contributing to global warming by releasing natural gas into the atmosphere. An Office of Inspector General July 2014 report found that EPA was not regulating methane emissions from natural gas distribution pipelines, had not partnered with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and that its voluntary program to address methane leaks has achieved limited success. Moreover, your report found that consumers were losing nearly $200 million each year from this leaking natural gas. I have introduced legislation in the Senate that would address some of the financial and policy barriers that are an impediment to repairing and replacing our aging, leaking natural gas pipeline infrastructure. While I know you have not read the legislation, would efforts to remove these barriers and disincentives that may be in place to reduce methane emissions from leaking natural gas pipelines, such as cost recovery and upfront capital investments, help address that problem?
Yes, sir. I think that would be a good thing.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Elkins, the EPA agreed with your recommendation that it should work with PHMSA to address methane leaks from a safety and environmental standpoint. EPA agreed to implement this recommendation by December 31st, 2014. Has that recommendation been implemented, in your opinion?
Well, sir, according to our books, it shows that the recommendations have been implemented, but until we are able to go out and do follow-up work, I can't tell you specifically that has occurred.
Is it your intention to follow up and to find out whether or not that work has been done?
Yes, sir. We will be following up.
Okay, that's going to be very helpful. Ms. Kendall, coal on federal lands belonging to the American people generates billions of dollars in revenue from the federal government each year. However, 3 decades after the GAO, at my request, discovered improprieties in coal lease sales in the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana, recent evaluations of the Federal coal program have found that many of the same problems persist today. Recently, the Inspector General and the GAO, again at my request, issued reports showing that taxpayers may be losing millions of dollars on this coal that belongs to them. In fact, based on my staff's review, I believe that using appropriate market calculations and assumptions in recent coal lease sales could potentially have yielded $200 million additional dollars or more for the American people. Ms. Kendall, of the 13 recommendations made in the IG report on the Federal coal program, the Bureau of Land Management agreed with the majority of them, although none had been implemented at the time the report was issued. Since this report was issued in 2013, BLM has taken some steps to address the deficiencies identified in the coal program. Of the 13 recommendations made in the IG report, how many are still left to be implemented?
Senator Markey, my understanding is that recommendations 2, 3, 6, 9, and 12 remain open and remain unimplemented. But I have a document that I would be happy to provide you and your staff that outlines the specifics of the status of those recommendations, which we would be happy to provide.
Okay, so 5 of the 13 recommendations have yet to be implemented.
That's correct, sir.
And the IG and GAO reports both found that BLM does not fully account for the potential that coal produced from Federal lands will be exported to foreign countries where it can be sold at a higher price. Coal exports from the Powder River Basin and other Federal lands are expected to increase substantially in the coming years. Do you believe that BLM is doing enough to evaluate the possibility of exports in determining the value of Federal coal?
Like Mr. Elkins, I don't believe that we've gone in to do a verification of what they're actually doing, but by virtue of what they've reported to us in terms of implementing the recommendations, it appears that they are doing what we asked as a result of our evaluation.
So you're saying they're now factoring in?
No, I believe that they are. We have not verified it, though.
Okay. Because I think that's very important. It's ultimately public property that's being sold to the private sector. If they're getting a higher price overseas for the coal, then that should be factored into what we sell it to the private sector for, so that we're putting more money into the Federal Treasury for a publicly owned good. Recommendation number 2 has yet to be implemented, and I think it's important for us to be able to get to the bottom of, that storyline as well. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Mr. Elkins. More than a decade ago, this is the last time that Republicans were a majority, I chaired this committee, and we were raising concerns over the EPA's grants management, and it seems like a lot still needs to be done. Just last month, I think it was, that there were two scientists who were convicted of stealing about $10 million in research grants. Is your office investigating any of these right now? You don't need to elaborate, just yes or no.
Senator, right off the top of my head, I can't think of a active case right now, but I'd be glad to.
Oh, okay, well, we'll give you the information, and we'd like to work with you in that respect. We know that you'd find that to be of interest. In February, your office launched an evaluation of EPA's and the state's ability to manage the potential threats of water resources and hydraulic fracturing. Now, this hydraulic fracturing is something I can talk about. The first hydraulic fracturing took place in my state of Oklahoma in 1948. And I remember when Lisa Jackson, who is the first administrator to the EPA chosen by President Obama, I asked her the question. I said, have you ever had any documented cases of groundwater contamination as a result of hydraulic fracturing? She gave the answer that she had not. I'm wondering, though, if you're going to be getting into this thing and making evaluations as to what they are attempting to do, it just seems to me, and I've been one of the top critics of the EPA, that when they get involved in these things, we find out that they're wrong. Nothing ever happens. You remember the case of Armendariz in the Range Resources, I think it was, down in Texas. You know, that got a lot of publicity, and it was our staff that uncovered the conversation that he had with his subordinates, saying, what you got to do to the oil and gas industry is what the Romans did to the Turks. When they go into a new town, they would crucify the first 4 Turks that they saw, and then they had their attention. Well, as a result of that, that exposure took place, and he is no longer there. He's got a better job with one of the environmental groups. I don't know which one it is, Senator Markey, but he's doing all right. Don't feel bad about him. Anyway, and then also the Pavilion, Wyoming. That was something where they came up with this criticism. And remember, the persons would have lost their home, and they decided to take it to court, and they won, and the EPA was wrong. The same thing happened in Pennsylvania. So I would just say that I'm hoping that you will be looking at these in terms of the performance, the history of what their successes and failures have been. Would you be willing to do that? And working with our office that has an abundance of information to help you.
Senator, we'd be more than happy to work with your office.
Okay, and I'd say that a similar thing to you, Ms. Kendall. I know that we're involved in 2 things right now that I think would be of interest to you. One is having to do with the Endangered Species Act. Both of them do, actually. These closed-door litigation and settlement agreements with environmental groups that require the service to decide whether to list species under the Endangered Species Act. It seems like, I don't care if it's the burrowing beetle or the lesser prairie chicken or what it is, once they either list something as threatened or endangered, they never get off the list. And there are reasons that they should get off the list. And so I would say that, would you agree to work with my staff, Ms. Kendall, in specifically reviewing the process that led to these settlements and how they're being implemented? And I'm talking about cooperative settlements with groups where they file the lawsuits. You know what the sue and settle is all about. Would you be willing to look into that and work with our office to try to resolve what I consider to be a serious problem?
It's an issue that I'm generally aware of, Senator Imhoff. We'd be happy to work with your staff to learn more about it and look into what this involves.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I mentioned that once something gets listed, they never get off. And an example, the service listed the American burrowing beetle as endangered in 1989. And 25 years later, the service has still not established the criteria for delisting the beetle. And so I think this is something that we need to work together on, and our staff is going to be involved in doing this. This is one of several things that we thought should have been done some 10 years ago when we first got involved in this. This particular beetle and this endangered status that it enjoys is one that has a lot to do with people who are out there farming, trying to plow their fields, people who are building roads, people are drilling for energy. And so it's something that certainly has a great effect in my state of Oklahoma. So if you would join us in that, we would appreciate it very much. Would you do that?
We'd be happy to work with you to understand this issue better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Crable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions for these witnesses, although I do want to indicate that I agree with the concerns that have been raised by my colleagues here today, and look forward to learning more about the responses that we'll see coming from both the EPA and the Department of Interior on these issues. But I'll yield my time back for you, given that we have a hard stop to utilizing your questioning.
Very.
You know, it might be a good idea, Mr. Chairman, maybe you did this before I came in, to remind him why we have to cut this short, because we do have a well-publicized hearing with the Secretary Kerry.
So we will, what I'd like to do is if the members that are here, if there are additional questions, we'll begin them, but we'll try to do them in 3-minute increments. And when we're done with that second round, if we have time, we'll take it. If not, we'll close it down. And with that, I just have a question, and I'd like to follow up a little bit with Ms. Kendall, just to follow up on Senator Inhofe's questions. With regard to your work being done in the Endangered Species Act, with the record number of species that have been listed as a result of the environmental litigation settlements, as the senators indicated, it would appear, and perhaps it's not correct, but I'd like your thoughts on it. It would appear that your office has done very little oversight on the settlements themselves, or specifically on the Endangered Species Act and the implementation. Has it not been requested, or does your office not see the ESA oversight as a priority compared to other areas? Or can you talk with us a little bit about whether or not there has been a review of the settlements which have been done internally that have placed some of these specific species on the act or being identified as being endangered?
Certainly, sir. We have not been advised externally from Congress, from the public, or internally through whistleblowers that there are specific problems about specific listings. If we had been so advised, we would certainly take a look at them. What I hear Senator Imhoff saying is that he has concerns about some very specific species. We'd be glad to get with staff to understand what those concerns are and take a look at them as appropriate.
I would like to expand that just a little bit in terms of the process utilized or the existing practice of how they are identified and how the determination is made to actually list them and what the criteria is that's out there. And I was wondering if you would also, with our committee, work through that process, go back through it and see just how exactly that process is being implemented today.
Certainly. One of the things that we do and have done in the 15 coming on 16 years that I've been with the IG's office is look at process, such as the Endangered Species Act listing or delisting process, and ensure that the process as it is being both practiced and in place is being appropriately executed. So we would
when
be
was
glad.
when was the last time that was completed?
Usually we do it when it's in the context of a concern, a specific concern. So it's been a number of years, sir.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Kendall, in 2014, your office completed a report that examined Department of Interior management of the disposal wells containing chemicals like benzene and pathogens from untreated sanitary waste on DOI-managed public lands. The report found that the Department's failure to understand its responsibilities under federal law may have endangered public health and drinking water supplies by allowing these sorts of wells to continue in operation for nearly 10 years after they were banned by the EPA. Has DOI implemented your recommendations to consistently identify, inspect, and manage these disposal wells and ensure compliance with federal regulations on public lands?
Sir, I do not have the specifics on the underground injection control report recommendations and what have been implemented. I would be glad to get those to you and your staff in regard to what they've implemented and what they haven't so far. I do know that generally the department agreed that it would work with EPA to ensure that they were in compliance with EPA regulations relative to Class 5 underground injection control wells.
Okay, good. So while the IG report only looked at one type of well, do you think that it is possible that other types of wells, such as those designed for disposal of hazardous waste and byproducts from oil and gas production, might be similarly mismanaged by the Department of Interior?
That was a concern of ours, sir. However, we took a look at a very high level and did not see the same kind of concern that we had with the Class 5 wells, and so at this point chose not to pursue that evaluation further.
Okay. Could you just take another look at it to determine whether or not that was the correct decision? Again, I would respect your judgment in that case, but
Certainly, we can do that,
taking
sir.
another look at it would be extremely helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Senator Inhofe.
Yeah, just real quickly, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Elkins, we had a hearing, our chemical hearing, on, I think it was March 18th in this committee, and we're going to have another one coming up in, I think, next week. And the recent reports by your office include 23 recommendations to improve the Chemical Safety Board. Now that we have that change that is taking place, what are the unresolved challenges that a new Chemical Safety Board leadership would have to address now that the chairman has resigned? Any comments about that? This is going to take place this coming week.
Yes, sir. There are a number of governance issues. Reinstating a board order that was rescinded would be a good first step. Gaining respect, the morale at that agency is very low. Treating the employees with respect is a big issue. I can go on. There are a number of other issues. I'd be glad to share that with you, but off the top of my head, those would be some of the key issues.
Yeah, and that is significant. I can remember that same issue was a problem with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. To regain the respect and the working relationship, I think is very important. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right now, I'm showing that we've got about 6 minutes left, and then we're going to have to shut down. But I'm just on a very rapid-fire item. Ms. Kendall, you indicated earlier that you had approximately, I believe, 533 investigations that had been completed thereabouts. And I understand Senator Markey had indicated perhaps 55 of them had been made public. I think my information said that even less than that had been made public. Just curious, just a quick thought. There's obviously got to be a reason why there's so many of them that have not been made public. Can you just, to clarify a little bit, why those have not been made public and what the processes are in place as to determining which ones are made public? I think that'd be fair to have you be able to respond to that.
Certainly, there are a couple things that need to be clarified. First, I think the 533, and I don't have the specific numbers, but I'll rely on Senator Markey's numbers, were probably complaints that were received by our criminal investigative group. That does not mean all of those would become criminal cases or even administrative cases. We have had a process in place to release investigative cases based on the FOIA rules, which says if you've got 3 requests, they should become public. We have since changed that process, and what we will be doing is deferring, quite frankly, to a release status as opposed to non-release status by virtue of summary of our investigative cases. We have just started getting that underway, but in deference to and in recognition of Senator Markey's observation, we think that it's important to release more of the investigative information. We did not keep it from anyone for any particular reason other than we were following the FOIA rules, which suggest that after 3 requests, they become public.
If you've made a change in your policy, would you, and if it's a written policy, I'm assuming that it is, would you share that with our committee as well, please?
I'm not sure that we have reduced it to writing, but we'd be glad to share it in sort of in theory what our new policy is, and it is being developed.
I think it's important enough to where if you're following it, that it be something that we should be able to look at as well.
Whatever we have, sir, we will get to you.
Thank you very much. Senator Markey, do you have any final comments, thoughts, or questions?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Kendall, I just want to clarify with respect to your office's recommendation to improve the federal coal program. You stated that one of the 5 recommendations that has not yet been implemented is recommendation number 2. Recommendation number 2 states that the BLM should take action to fully account for the export potential in developing coal, the fair market value. So it appears that BLM has not yet fully implemented the possibility of exports in determining the fair market value of federal coal leases, as your office recommended. Can you check on the status of the 5 recommendations for the federal coal program and report back to the committee?
We will do that actually with all the recommendations, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Once again, I'd like to thank the Inspectors General for the work that they do overseeing the management of our agencies, and I would also like to thank my colleagues who attended this hearing for their thoughts and their questions. The record will be open for 2 weeks, which brings us to Tuesday, April 28th. I want to thank you for coming and sharing. We look forward to working with you. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.